entrepreneurship and startups and this thing, it was not as cool as it is today. For example, when you were building your company, you did not have all of the people either online to look at for motivation, but also for ideas, for education. And so, my question is, what do you think is being spewed in terms of information when it comes to entrepreneurship that you actually disagree with? Like, what you see the advice that's online all the time about, because
Sure.
it's such a cool topic to talk about now. What do you think is advice that you disagree with? And then what do you think is not said enough?
For sure. That's a really great question. Interestingly, I was at a Georgia Tech class this week asking students, why aren't you doing a startup? Number one blocker, and this was at Georgia Tech, but I believe this is applicable to every university possibly in the world except one. And I think, and I got feedback on one, which was Stanford, where every student at Stanford is talking about startups. There's no one talking about how to get a job at some large company like Google or Meta or whatever. It's like, what is your startup? And so that's the culture that I think needs to change. And so when I was talking, like, what's the blocker for you guys building a startup? They're like, none of our peers are talking about startups. We're being hammered with, where are you going to intern? Which FANG are you going to work for? And I think that psychology of like, you have to go work for a large company really is pervasive. And I've talked to a lot of students. I'm like, why are you going to go work for a large company? And it's like, oh, that's how I get my business experience. It's actually counterproductive to go work for a large company, because usually in a large company, the big problem's been solved. So any new employees get kind of a very narrow job focus within a large company. You don't wear a lot of hats. You're wearing one hat to do one thing within that company. That's totally counter to what a startup is. You got to wear every hat. Every day you're customer support, you're building, you're selling, you're marketing, you're HR, everything. And so to me, and you got to execute fast. And I'd say for probably 90+% of most large companies, executing fast is not a concept. And so I think that's the stuff that I hear, that even today when I talk to students, like, what's stopping you? I think culture, being aware that there is a startup ecosystem. Like even when I was there, I was like, did you know there's a student club dedicated to startups? And like half the class had no idea. And I'm like, we all make assumptions that are in there when you're in the community, that everybody knows about it. But then if you take a bunch of random people, students, and ask them like, oh, did you know about this club or that club and this stuff going on? They have no idea. So I think what you're doing is creating more awareness for others to go, hey, I've never considered doing a startup. What's the path? And my guess is every campus in this country probably does have a student club for startups. There are probably already resources, but you have to go hunt them down and figure out where they are and which faculty and what other students are doing it. So that's the narrative that I would love to see shift, because this is a unique time to go figure out what you're passionate about, find purpose, go solve a real problem. And there's, enough problems in the world, as we know. So, I would love to help fund more startups solving today's problems.
Absolutely. I think that there is somewhat what your comment on the joining a big company. I think that there is a lot of people, especially around that age, that have a bit of an identity problem. And there can be kind of an in-group, out-group sort of idea that, hey, I'm going to go work at the big company because that's what'll make me cool or successful. And the fear of failure, I think, is really big. Obviously, I think that there is no excuse now in terms of not having the information, because again, anyone has access to it. So if you're truly interested in it, to go pursue it. I don't think that, for example, an excuse that you could have used in your time, which is like, if I want to figure out how to do this thing, I kind of got to do it myself or work really hard to network. Whereas I think today it's a lot easier to do that. But I do think that there's probably people who are like, whether it's parents or friends or whatever, oh, if I don't work at one of the big 4 consulting firms, then what was the point of my degree?
I want to hit on something you just talked about, which was fear of failure. One of the that is a something that I saw a lot when we were having that conversation. Where am I technical enough? Even though they were able to code, am I technically capable of doing a startup? And I'm like, or is my idea technically good enough? Or what happens if it doesn't? It fails. And I want to stress that almost all of my startup teams that I've seen go through this whole process, once they get on the going out there trying to talk to customers, figure out their pain points, the vast majority of them end up realizing their startup idea originally is a failure idea, meaning it's okay. You know what they do? They pivot. They go, okay, now that I'm talking to some customers, I realize this idea is not good. That's okay. There's no shame in failure. It's an idea. You're not a failure. Maybe the assumptions you had were a failure, but I tell all the teams, I'm backing the team. It's okay to pivot. I want you to pivot to bigger and better ideas. Do not get stuck thinking I have to die with this failure. And I really want young entrepreneurs to embrace the failure, because that's where you learn. I mean, I think maybe for me, it helps to frame it as an experiment. I'm always like, do this experiment, figure out if this works, because that's how you learn from your experiments. And if a startup is a failure, that's okay. You're going to pivot. You'll come up with other ideas. And I think everybody that has, I'd say almost like 95% of all the startups very rarely get all the assumptions right. You're making pivots every day. And even my own company, when I was going through, I was like, as long as I'm batting more than 50%, I'm probably beating my competition. And I was like, because we are failing all the time on doing different things, but you learn, you adjust, you tweak. And I would say today's society, there's a real fear of failing, and I'm not going to have my good grades, or what happens if I drop out of school. That's another area that we're trying to address, is like, you're not dropping out of school. Maybe you're taking a sabbatical to go try your startup. And the nice thing about schools like Georgia Tech, let's say you try your startup, it doesn't work out. You realize it's not going to be the big success you wanted. That's okay. You can always go back to Georgia Tech. That was the thing that gave me confidence, was when I called admissions and I said, how long are my credits good for? They said 10 years. I was like, man, if I don't know whether I'll be a success in 10 years, I've got other problems. So, that gave me, I guess, 10-year runway to figure out whether my first company would be a success. And I think more students have to have, embrace the failure, but realize maybe it's not cut out for them.
Yeah, I think that's so beautifully put. I think that any time that I actually made a video on this somewhat this morning, that if you want different results, right? If you want to be someone who's special or accomplish something that most people don't, by definition, you're going to have to do things that most people don't. And that's going to be uncomfortable. And I'm saying this as someone who thus far in my life has taken the very, very safe path, right? Even though I'm on social media is not the most risky thing I've done, but it's not even that risky in the grand scheme of things, right? I do work a 9 to 5. I did finish my degree.
When are you doing a startup?
Working on it. Hopefully soon. But I think that, many people, it is the discomfort of not even necessarily failing, but the prospect of failing. Because I think that once it's a weird analogy to make, but I even will see it kind of like dating or approaching someone, right? There's a risk that you'll get rejected, right? But you'll realize that, and this would be analogous to failing a startup, you'll realize that life moves on. You're not going to die. And so I think that it's something that you can train your brain almost to push yourself into the discomfort and realize, okay, I'm still here. I still woke up the next morning. Now what?
That's right. Actually, and I just chatted recently at a table where head of Apple research, she was there, and she manages the AR, VR headset. And we were talking to some students, and we were on the topic of, is a startup a good thing? What happens if you fail and you have to go get a job at Apple? She goes, I love looking at resumes where they did do a startup, because it really shows that they're willing to take some risk, talk to customers, learn that. And so in her mind, spending the summer working on a startup was a huge plus and makes you stand out. So it's another, even if you want to go into more of your traditional large technology companies, I think doing a startup is a great stepping stone to getting there.